Alrighty, so for Learn Together Week 13, we're going to continue working on our app that we didn't choose to do for Develop It, so the continuation of Week 12. And this week I want you to create a new page for editing, like we learned how in this section. Sync data being edited across different browser tabs. That's where you do the event listener for storage. And then you write the code to update the local storage and then update the other page so the other pages can see that. And then use date. This is probably the one I actually need to work on, but I got most everything else done. So use the date information to create some meaningful interaction on your app. And I'll show you the one I'm going to add as well. And here's the one that I've been, hinting of, is create some basic CSS including media queries and responsive design. So one of the things I've done that I can't believe I didn't do till now, and I'm guessing some of you have already seen this, is here's the link to my code. So everything I'm going to show you today you can go look at in more detail, right? And then, like before, see how much of this you could do on your own. For some reason, this one I looked at a little more than the last one. I'm not sure why. But then, in your reply, talk about the CSS or, your feeling about this section, how much you got from it. So, and then I'm going to show you how this can be helpful, especially when you're doing some basic CSS, okay? Because one thing I know I'm not great at is like thinking about, well, if I spend a lot of time, I can come up with something that looks good, but why do it if somebody like Adobe has already created color schemes? So I've given you a link here to some color schemes that are complementary colors that go together, which is basically that. And you can choose, and what I do is I spend a little bit of time thinking about my app and looking at these colors to go, okay, that kind of goes with what I was looking for. So let's go ahead and move over and I'll show you what my output is. So what I did here is I used my color scheme to then apply CSS to divs, right? And then this, of course, this is nothing new, right? So this is just entering data, right? And then displaying data on this side. But what I like about this is that, as I move into that breakpoint, then it stacks them on each other using something very simple called a flexbox. So I'll just briefly look at my code, but you can see it in a minute. So the other thing I did is I implemented a delete button, and then so I could edit it, right? So then I edit energy data, right? So if I edit this to 5 and then return, oh, I gotta check that. Did I do that right? Oh, I did it. Did I not pay attention? No, I didn't. It's so funny. So anyway, there's a couple more things I'm going to do to this. Basically, one thing I'm going to do is do a sort. So you can sort, right now it's sorted by date, right? And I showed you this last time, nothing I've changed in here. So if I went back into September, I entered some data. It would of course show up at the top. So it's listed. Actually, I could do it reverse order, would probably make sense as well. But again, this is just basically these learn togethers, as I've said before, are basically just our opportunity to say, okay, now that you've learned something, see how well you can implement this into some app of your own design, right? And so in this case, I also put in a header and a footer. And on here, you can just basically see I actually ended up creating another class for this as well. So let's move over just real quickly and look at the code that I wrote. We're not going to look at all of it because it would just take a bit of time. So most of the code that you write for this one, right, is really not on functions. Is really, and you do a little bit here when you add maybe change the span to an A, add on the A tag, add an attribute of ref, put in whatever you name that edit file, right? And then with the template string, inject that, what I call UUID, he called it ID, right? And then I append that into the element and re-render everything, remove day if they click it, save it, and then re-render it. But I believe most of the work happens right over here in your new file called energy edit, right? And of course setting up the edit file itself, right? So this is something we hadn't seen before, and this is something I resisted doing because I wanted to, because it just is so much easier. Instead of writing out document query selector, is you just write out, store it in a constant, and then you can reuse it wherever you need it. Just makes your code cleaner, right? So then we're getting on that location, right? So this is where when the user clicks on an item, right, because that UUID, it pulls it out of that hash and allows you to then rebuild that, substring that out, right? That gets you the ID that you're looking at. And then I get save data, and then I do a find, right, to see if this is indeed a valid one. If it's not, if my day comes back as undefined, right, go back to the index file. In this case, update these fields, right? So this is where when you click on edit, right, you update these fields with whatever is stored in your and in this case, these aren't local storage references, right? These are when you bring out the data from local storage to have in your memory. So in this case, right, we're referencing those data items. And then when there's an input on either of these, and by the way, hopefully you are starting to learn. And if you aren't, man, I'm telling you, it makes you so much easier to do debugging the way he showed or using in the browser. Either one, way great to use. So this is where because I just updated the date and the data. So this is my kilowatt, right? And then just save data once I updated those things. So these are just listening for inputs so that we're updating that, saving the data into local storage so you can show it or display it. So this is where you're listening for changes in storage, and that is so that your other tabs can have that as well, right? So this is basically whatever key you set up, right? And we're looking at that new value because this is the data that's changed, right? This is why this only works on other pages. We get save data, right? We again look to see if that's a valid ID, ID, so we're looking for them. If we don't find it, we go back and then we repopulate those fields, right? So those input values right here. So again, most of the work happens here on whatever you're calling your edit page. We end up now with 3 JS files typically. And then on your edit page, what you can do, and I did this and it makes sense really from development, is I chose a new Google font. I linked the same CSS file, which I'll show you in a minute, right? I gave it a div called class, right? So this div right here called class. So this is just in my edit file. And then I gave some styling just to that because I didn't need this page to be responsive, but basically I just centered it. So in my CSS here, right, going up to the top, I set some global, we kind of call these global bodies and H1s. I did a class for buttons so I could play around with that. And this is where I have my flex box, right? So this is where I say enter the data, display the data, right? So these two are classes that I then set the color, right? So these are where I'm setting the color of these divs here. And then if on both of these, and I set a padding, and so what this means is that on both of these we have shared CSS selectors, right? And then we have customized ones, one that apply only to those. That's what that means. And then on the edit, I was saying before, this is where I set up some CSS just for the edit one. And this is as simple as media queries can be, right? Edit 600, and so this is where once this window, right, viewport hits 600, then it just places those on top of each other. So I'm really just kind of giving you a chance here to play with this. And this is just basically what it does is on the kilowatts, which is the data display, then it gives a little margin. Actually, it's on the top one right here. So this actually ends up having a little margin so that when you have a little margin between them. So anyway, you have the access to that code. You can take a look at it. So that's, like I said, the only thing I think I need to do is add a little more date information, like maybe date created, and I like the way he did date created at and updated at. That'd be a good thing to do. Okay. So here we are. We're going to finish up. You're going to finish up this week in the next night or so, because I'm recording this on Wednesday so you're actually doing this week. You're going to be finishing up the section that we just reviewed for at least high level of code that you're doing. And then in week 13, we end up doing section 9, all of section 9. And section 9 doesn't necessarily add any new functionality to our app, but we're just learning some new coding paradigms, right? And these are really good. So we'll end up changing some of the code to implement like arrow functions, ternary operators where we can, truthy and falsy values. We've already been using these. It just talks a little about it. Type conversion, throwing, catching errors, such important, handling those errors, right? So in this case, it's actually good. I'm going to go ahead and start working on that section 9, but now that I've finished this, I can go forward and look at the develop it 4. Okay, so I think it's time now, because now I have to think about, and with the way I've done my own app, how I'm going to implement this edit. So what this may mean is, for me and for some of you, depending on what you did, you may have to redo some things just to start working on this develop it 4. But that is my next goal, is actually to start working on that, on the requirements here. But I think as far as the flow goes, it'll be the same thing as what we had in the develop it 3, which is you can come the week after it's due if you want to change your code after I've graded it. And I think for the most part, I think there was only one time I forgot I didn't actually give a grade, and I should have, to a student who had submitted. So, we're all learning this new process together. Okay, so like I said, I've given you the link here to the Learn Together, on the Learn Together 13 for my code, which is here, so you can take a look at it and see in more detail what I did, and looking at my JS files so that you can see how I implemented this particular Learn Together. Okay, and I think that's it. So I will talk to you soon. Bye.